Okay. So we went from the formation of the 13 colonies all the way to the American Revolutionary War and the founding of America as an independent nation, all the way up to the first Civil War, and then all the way up to the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm just going to talk about my experience since I've lived through it. So, and just to give a little context on the situation, like 1939, we have Billie Holiday, and she's a singer, but she's also pretty revolutionary in her approach. So, in her time, these lynchings are going on. So you have a situation where the KKK is terrorizing black people because they're pretty much hating on these black people's new freedom. So you have these black people being lynched by these mobs, by these, I'll just say mobs, the KKK members, and it's to the point where people would literally buy tickets to come watch these lynchings, and hey, let's take a piece of his ear as a souvenir, for example. So Billie Holiday seeing these lynchings going on, and she makes a song, Strange Fruit. So some of the lyrics are, blood on the leaves, blood at the roots, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. You feel me? So, strange fruit. So she literally is making these powerful songs about what she's seeing around her. And so Strange Fruit is just about these lynchings. And her lyrics were so powerful because she's just describing these black men and women, even children, being lynched by the neck by these nooses hanging from these trees. So, we fast forward and then we get the civil rights movement, and it leads to more modern times like the Black Panther Party. And one of these prominent leaders of the Black Panther Party was, we have Bobby Seale, Huey P. Newton, and also Fred Hampton. So Fred Hampton, he was one of these powerful leaders of the Black Panther Party. And the Black Panther Party, it was really a black love movement. It was a black revolutionary movement, but it was more about peace. But yes, these black men held arms, but as Americans and as humans, it is our right by law to defend ourselves and bear arms. So it's a very peaceful movement. And of course, sometimes peace calls for self-defense. So you have this leader, Fred Hampton, and another thing that the Black Panthers were responsible for was the free lunch program. So the nutrition program feeding these kids in schools, that started with the Black Panther Party. So that's another thing. And also they were big on black women wearing their natural hair. So you see a lot of black women wearing these afros during this movement especially. So that was very cool. So eventually on this cold night, December 4th, 1969, you get the police raiding his house in Chicago, Illinois, his apartment. And they're saying that his apartment was basically a place where they were holding a depot for holding guns and stashing guns. So you get this incident where the police come to his house and they basically break in and they start shooting up the house. They start shooting up the apartments. And it said that there were about 8 members of the Black Party there, and all of them died besides Fred Hampton's, I believe it was his girlfriend, so that was pregnant at the time. So the police come in shooting the house. Pow, pow, pow. and you just hear screams throughout the house. And Fred Hampton's laying there, and he doesn't get up. He just looks up, and you just hear shooting, pow, pow, pow. And then you're, stop, stop. We have this pregnant woman here, but they still keep shooting, pow, pow. And then finally the shooting stops, and the police come in, and they see Fred Hampton laying there, and they're like, oh my gosh, you're like, okay, he's still alive. He's barely alive, he's barely breathing. And then a little bit after, you hear some more shots. Pow, pow, pow. And then the police, finally, they say, okay, he's not alive anymore. So that just shows how now we're not necessarily dealing with lynchings by the noose of these people hanging from trees, but now these are political lynchings, where now the police could just come up and shoot you. So that led to many shootouts. There were many shootouts from the Black Panther Party and police, from Oakland to Chicago. And so that was like the rise and collapse of the Black Panther Party. So that leads up to more modern days. We had President Obama elected in 2008, and all the way to 2016. And then you get the election of President Trump, who was president from 16 through 2020. Okay, so under Obama, a lot of, now in hindsight, sometimes you get criticisms like, oh, he should have did more for Black people, which you could argue maybe should have, maybe he couldn't have, maybe he could have. But regardless, during his presidency, at least Americans were free. So you still have police shootings and police murders against innocent Black civilians in the streets. But besides that, it was a very good time. Like, just thinking back on living throughout Obama's presidency, at least Americans were free. We weren't forced to take injections into our bodies or anything like that. So it was to me, I'll say a golden age, as far as I can remember, of America. So now you fast forward to Trump, and, this Republican. Obama was a Democrat. But honestly, I voted for Trump because I do believe in Republican values. I, of course, voted for Obama because he's a Black man, but also I believed in his ideals, especially as a Black man coming in and just changing the world. That's a revolutionary thing when you have the first Black president. Okay. So, but he served his 2 terms. It'd be great if we could have voted for him for a 3rd term. But now we have Trump. So Trump versus Hillary. So I'm like, hey, let's give Trump a shot. And Trump protected his interests, but he also protected the interests of the country. So that leads us up to the year 2020. So during these time periods, you do have a lot of people getting shot and killed from 2016 up to 2020. So there's many, Ahmaud Arbery, this is where you get the Breonna Taylors, and you get the George Floyd killing of 2020. So the Breonna Taylor, she was killed in May of 2020, and George Floyd was killed in March of 2020. And also, while all of this is going on, the pandemic hit us in 2020 very tough. So also you have a pandemic going on in 2020. So this is just showing the situation that really led up to the Black Lives Matter movement. So you have the, George Floyd incident, Breonna Taylor incident, and also you have this technology of where we have these phones to where we could capture video and share these things to the world. So you just see this situation where Derek Chauvin, this police officer, is putting his knee on the neck of George Floyd, and he's just putting his knee on his neck, holding it there until ultimately George Floyd loses his life. And, this sends shockwaves through the Black community, through the social media community, which ultimately sends shockwaves through the world. So even though we're under a pandemic and pretty much on lockdown, the Black Lives Matter movement really is in full effect. So you see protests all across the country, from New York to Florida to Chicago to California, just all throughout the country and all throughout the world. So when they seen the Black Lives Matter movement throughout, in America, this really triggered protests throughout the whole world. And, it was a pretty crazy time, like just me remembering this protest during the pandemic. So it's like, for one, you don't want to go outside really because of the pandemic and the lockdowns. And then plus on two, you have these protests that sometimes leads into riots, and sometimes, it's just a crazy situation. You have people breaking in stores, you have people protesting. So really being out on the streets is very frantic, whether you're white, black, a police officer or not. It is a very tense situation going on. So during 2020, I myself, I remember being in two protests specifically. So, you have us, different people holding up signs, Black Lives Matter, and we're pretty unified. It was more than just holding up signs. Like, you see flags getting holded up, you see buildings on fire, smoke in the air, police throwing tear gas at the citizens. So there's really a lot of turmoil going on through these protests throughout the whole country. This was a countrywide situation during the middle of a pandemic. So really, this protest really showed a lot of unity for Black people and also Americans in general, because at the protest I went to, you still have a lot of white men there, a lot of white women there, a lot of Mexicans joining. So there was a lot of unity as well. So there's a lot of tensions and divisions, but at the same time, it showed the reflection of the unity of America. That this was during the beginnings of the pandemics in 2020. And then after, it really, spurred up. And ultimately, Black Lives Matter ended up being watered down. Basically I say from the outside, because you really had a lot of white people really trying to take advantage or make a profit off of the situation, whether it's from t-shirts or pretending they're a Black-owned business, writing these books, just different marketing tactics, to where, you have billions of money going into this movement, but Black people aren't benefiting from it at the end of the day. So Black Lives Matter, it was a very big movement, and it sent shockwaves throughout the world. And ultimately, it was stifled from the outside, and also just the pandemic, to where they're like, okay, now we're really locking you guys down. So now it was pretty much a martial law situation after that. And then now they're forcing people to take these injections just to go to work. So really there's a lot of division after the protest. Though the pandemic had already started, after the protest, there really was more division from the actual government, to the point where, people are divided. Hey, pro injection. Other people like, I'm against the jab. Whether it's your own family members and your own coworkers. So some people, you had a point to where teachers were protesting against it, you know, and it's very ironic that we've had 400 years of slavery and brutality and racism and oppression, but also we're supposed to have 400 years of rights and liberties and voting rights. And ultimately, it's sad that it came down to this, to where we're forced to take things into our bodies in the freest country of the world. And we know, and then we're forced to be locked down in the freest country of the world. And then we're forced to go to these stores. Now you can't go to the store without a mask on, covering your face. That's how bad it was. In the freest country of the world, where, just a couple years before this, somebody will shoot you if you tell them, oh, you got to wear this to go inside this store. But our freedoms and our rights had got so diluted to the point where it almost became a new normal to accept these things. And, it's very Orwellian, very 1984-ish, Now, this was the most authoritarian I've ever seen America. This most authoritarian I've ever seen any empire in the history of the world, to be honest. Besides Hitler, okay? But thankfully, for whatever different reasons, things have calmed down. They're not necessarily forcing us to take these injections into our body anymore, or now they're more lax. Now we're able to go to the store and without wearing a pink shirt. Now people are actually reclaiming their freedoms as sovereign human beings, and just remembering the history of what we fought for, and lived and died for. As Americans, as God-fearing people, as divine human beings. So, this was very historical, this Black Lives Matter movement. And, history will look back on this. This was the biggest protest ever. This was literally the biggest protest in the history of the world. So, this was no small feat. This was no little thing. This was a big issue going on. Protesting this police brutality, just this centuries of racism, of redlining, of forcing us into ghettos, of police killings, and also just mass incarceration. So this was just I'll say a political revolution overall. So ultimately, God's will is always for the better, and God's plan is always for good. So ultimately, I feel like, this would be for the better of the country and for the betterment of the world overall. And now, modern day, present day, there's still a lot of tensions going on, but, we have President Biden, this Democratic president. So, my hopes is just that we can unify as a country despite what the outside world and wars that's going on, because, we're so quick to forget what our ancestors and forefathers have fought. We're quick to forget what they've done to get us here. Now, we have all these luxuries, we have these freedoms, so it's easy to take things for granted. But, just like the story of Atlantis, it could all be gone overnight. So my hopes is just that we unify as a country and just become better for the future generations, and just show everybody that we are the light of the world, and that God loves America, and God bless America.